One minute. I always stand sharper too.
Yes, we're live and everyone's going to
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 2 o'clock and I like to start sharp. First of all, I need to welcome not only you who are here, but also the audience around in a virtual world, because this is a public session, public webinar. And the title of our discussion today is A Hero's Legacy. And a conversation with Ambassador Michael Žantovský. I'm going to invite him in a moment, but first I need to thank co-sponsors or sponsors of this event, Dorothea Green Lecture Series and European and Eurasian Studies Program. So this is our common endeavor, and we hope that this will not be only something for you who are in my class, but that you'll be able to communicate with whoever is around. So now the introduction of the topic and of our guest speaker. I will start from him. Michael Jankowski, who is here on the screen. Maybe the most direct thing is a long-time friend of mine. We used to be colleagues way before the new situation started in 1989 with Velvet Revolution. She was part of it. Used to be a spokesperson for Václav Havel before the revolution or during the revolution, and in the first period of the presidential life of Václav Havel in the Prague Castle. Also is experienced diplomat. He was ambassador, if I'm right, to the United States, to Israel, and to the United Kingdom. So he knows diplomacy in and out. And now he's my successor, if I can say, because I also was the director of Václav Havel Library in Prague, because that's what Michael is right now. He's director of Václav Havel Library in Prague, which means that he is the main guardian of Václav Havel's legacy. And obviously, we are going to discuss Václav Havel's legacy not only as the past, but as what it is today, how this legacy can participate in our contemporary discussions in the Ukraine, and all what's happening in our part of the world is a very important aspect of it. Another thing I have in mind is we are both similar age and you are way younger. So the question is how our experience can be translated in a way that is comprehensible to you. Because obviously our generation is on the way out, you are on the way in. And it's very important for us not to turn Václav Havel's legacy into some sort of monument that we should bow in front of in anniversaries, but it is a living part of our discussion today. Václav Havel Library in Prague is now a very interesting entity. They started even a TV program called Havel Channel. And the communications with younger generation, I think, is daily bread from Michael. So please welcome him. And certainly I would love to ask him to start and saying something, how the world is seen from Václav Havel Library today. And how are you, Michael? And welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And good afternoon from Prague. Everyone, and from the Václav Havel Library. If you want to learn more about what we do, look it up at václavhavel.org. or at our online TV channel, havelchannel.cz. I have to do some advertising here as well. Well, the world from Prague perspective these days is an entirely new proposition to what it was just 3 months ago, and you're all aware of the reason why this is so. About 700 kilometers, or let's say 500 miles to the east, there is a war going on, and it's not a small civil conflict. It's not a dispute between two countries. It's a war of aggression by the largest country in the world, the Russian Federation, against a smaller neighbor, Ukraine. And it's a war in every kind of sense, a conflict of horrific violence, destruction, suffering, and now close to maybe 10 million people on the run from the aggression, both inside Ukraine and as refugees to the neighboring country, including my country. We have at the moment about 300,000 Ukrainian refugees, which for a country of 10 million people represents, you can do the arithmetics, 3% of the population, and coming in a few days or a couple of weeks, basically. And so the whole country currently scrambles to provide shelter and food and some kind of a refuge for the refugees, their families, schools for their children, etc., etc. And as serious a problem as it is, it's also a rather encouraging spectacle. Czechs, my fellow citizens, like most people in the developed West these days, are for most time focused on their own prosperity and their welfare and their careers and their future. And all of a sudden something like this happens, and we witnessing wonderful shows of solidarity, of support, of help for the refugees, people collecting money and food and clothing and arranging for the refugees to stay in their homes or in their country homes if they have any. So it shows also something about humanity, something heartwarming, and it's even more encouraging in the face of this senseless, horrific violence perpetrated by the regime of Vladimir Putin and his cronies. So this is the perspective I'm speaking from at the moment, because there's very little else of interest or concern in Europe these days than this very situation, and the determination in our part of Europe is that this aggression must be stopped, that the aggressor must be pushed back, and that sovereignty and home rule for the Ukrainians must be reestablished. Now, how does this speak to the legacy of Václav Havel, and what are the connecting points and similarities and differences to what we had gone through during the communist period, and what shaped Václav Havel in his life and made him emerge as one of the great international and domestic heroes of our time. And there are some superficial, perhaps, similarities that you can discern right away. I mean, first of all, both Václav Havel and the Ukrainian president, the leader of the defense against the Russian aggression, have been show business people. I mean, a playwright and a writer in the case of Václav Havel, and a comedian and a TV personality in the case of Volodymyr Zelensky. And this perhaps masks a more important similarity, in that neither of them became the leader of his nation because of a career choice or education or an obvious ambition to become a politician. They came to public life from their performing careers and their show business careers, and they grew into their public posture and in their public figure as time went on, and it illustrates something that Martin will like to hear, and that a great Czech philosopher, Jan Patočka, who was also a teacher to Martin, has often pointed out that the greatness of man is not measured in the choices that he makes, and in the choices about what he wants to do, but in how he or she copes with the situation he's being faced with. He's being confronted with. You know, this is the phenomenon that is sometimes sometimes described as thrownness, as being thrown into a situation, and the measure of man is how well he copes with such a situation. And for both Václav Havel and Volodymyr Zelensky, this situation came about in a similar fashion, in an attack of another country against their own country. And actually it was the same country, although 60 years back, when this happened in Czechoslovakia, it was called the Soviet Union, and now it's called the Russian Federation. But we both were overnight faced with a situation in which hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers attacked our countries overnight. And actually, in the case of Czechoslovakia, which is 5 times smaller than the country of Ukraine in terms of territory and in terms of population, the number of soldiers were twice as many as the number that attacked Ukraine a few weeks ago. And Václav Havel, who until then was not one of the leading actors in the process of political reforms, which we remember as the Prague Spring of 1968, and which was basically a communist-led reform process to make the system, which was failing economically and socially, more palatable to the population, something quite similar to the Mikhail Gorbachev reforms 20 years later. And Havel was, of course, interested in what was going on, but he did not feel this was his own battle, because as many people in the country, he felt that the Communist Party and its leading role was part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So only when the attempt at reform came to an end through the Soviet invasion in August 1968, it had become also Havel's struggle, Havel's battle, Havel's conflict, and then he immediately became active in the clandestine radio broadcasts protesting the invasion and trying to organize non-violent resistance to the invasion, because unlike Ukraine, Czechoslovakia in August 1968 was in no position to offer armed resistance, because all its military structures and political structures were infiltrated by the Soviets, agents and agents of influence, and so on and so forth. But this was the first time that Havel became a public opposition figure, and he persisted in his activities for the next 20 years, despite long periods of persecution, despite several arrests, and despite 5 years he spent in jail, only to emerge victorious in the Velvet Revolution of 1989 and becoming the leader of the nation and one of the great figures of democracy, freedom, struggle for freedom, and human rights around the world, because human rights and the fight for human rights was very much at the core of his struggle. And you may ask, and people have been asking, what drove him to take such a very difficult road, a road that he never really planned and never really chose, and what made him endure throughout the hardships and the persecution and the time in jail. And the simple answer to that, it was a lifelong sense of responsibility, not just for one's own life, but also for the lives of people around you, your country, and the world at large. Havel understood this responsibility as a metaphysical responsibility. I mean, in his writings and in his some of his speeches, it is described as something beyond the horizon of everyday life, something above and beyond our everyday experience, but at the same time something permanent and inescapable. Havel sometimes compared it to a record, to a book or a record in which all our actions are recorded and inscribed and will one day be taken into account. And you will realize that this is a quasi religious concept, similar to the Last Judgment or concepts like that in other religions. But Havel himself was not a religious person. He was a spiritual person who believed that there is something beyond our everyday experience, something higher than man himself, but he did not identify this concept with a particular religion or a personal God. But it did serve him in good stead in enduring the difficulties, and it brought him to a point of leadership and fame and universal respect and all that. And I dare speculate that Volodymyr Zelensky in this respect is not very different from Havel. Yes, he moved from a TV personality to a political career. In this respect, you know, he was not all that different from Donald Trump, who who walked the same trajectory from screen to political life. Volodymyr Zelensky became a well-known figure in his country because of a TV series in which he played a fictional president. So, you know, his road to fame was a bit of a reality TV phenomenon, but he was not, for a long time, he was not, you know, universally liked or popular by the citizens of his country. His popularity ratings have gone down, as they do with most presidents after they've been elected and after the promises they've made turn out to be not feasible or realistic. And he became what he is today, faced with the situation of acute danger for his country and for himself personally as well, because it is now a matter of record that there was a Russian plan afoot to have him assassinated or kidnapped in the first hours and days of the invasion. And as a matter of fact, the US government has offered to bring him and his family to safety from Ukraine in the face of this danger. And faced with this choice, you know, being thrown into this choice, he chose to stay and resist and symbolize his whole nation's fight for sovereignty and freedom and democracy. And that's why he is the hero he is today. And that's why I and several other people have proposed him as a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize at the end of this year, because more than anyone else, not just in Ukraine, but in Europe today, and perhaps in the world, he symbolizes the courage, the resilience, and the will to stay free and to resist evil. And I will finish, Martin, with one remark that I wanted to make, maybe should have made in the beginning, about Havel. One of Havel's core belief, and it is expressed by Zelensky just as well, is the obligation of man to resist evil. To resist evil, not in the future, not in any indirect way, but to resist it as it happens, when it happens, and where it happens directly. And for Havel, the source of this belief was the core trauma of his generation and his parent generation and of many Czechs at the time. And that was the trauma of the Munich Agreement in 1938, in which, in the face of Hitler's threats to start a war, the then allies of Czechoslovakia, France, and Britain gave up to Hitler's demands to annex a part of the Czech territory the so-called Sudetenland, just like Putin today demands the annexation of the easternmost part of Israel, the Donbass, and the allies try to appease him by giving in to his demands in the fake belief or false belief that they were preserving peace in this way. Instead, Hitler gobbled up the Sudetenland, and a year later started a war which cost 50 million lives in Europe and around the world. 50 million lives. So this belief that, you know, we should not confront the evil because they might be mean to us is one of the fatal illusions that people might have, and inevitably it always causes greater suffering, more casualties, and terrible moral damage and despair. So this is what I wanted to say in the beginning, and I can see, Martin, that now you want to say something.
I hope that you are getting ready with your own remarks, questions, but I will misuse or abuse my role here. So I will start. I will have 3 remarks. And Michael, if there is still time, I have a McCarthy Medal Albright, but only later. My 3 remarks. First one is based on theater, because that's what Havel and Zelensky seems to have in common. I was very long time ago stricken by a remark of one British sociologist, Ernst Gellner, who said that Czechoslovakia was a country of professors. And then it happened that professors ran out. And then when the time came again to start again or to liberate our country, we had to be satisfied with a playwright. So playwrights and professors are 2 different and interesting categories. But I will start from a classic, Shakespeare. I think that perfect reading for all of us is Hamlet, because Michael said that neither Havel and nor Zelensky were born politicians. They were put into their situation and they had to act accordingly. So the first scene from Hamlet, from Shakespeare's Hamlet, after he is informed by the ghost that what happened. So the final sentence he already says when he's living with his friends is this: time is out of joint, or cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. So he was kind of surprised, but felt this obligation. It's up to him to set it right. And then later, he invited, as you know, players, theater players, to the castle. And then when he was welcoming them, he said this, I just Googled it, this famous thing: what is the purpose of playing? To hold as were the mirror up to the nature, to show virtue her feature, scorn her own image, and the very age and the body of the time, his form and pressure. It seems to me that if you can say something about Zelensky today, that's exactly what he is doing. He's showing the world things as they really are, not covered by some sort of ideological language. And the last quote from Shakespeare, from the same, from Hamlet, when he is talking to the actors, he says this famous thing: play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. That's was the tradition of or the strategy of his playing to catch the conscience of the king. Who is the king here? What it is a great topic, and I think that's something what we have been discussing with Michael all the time. So that's my first remark, and maybe Michael wants to comment on that before you will start. But I have two more things, two questions. First is the great news from the Czech Republic, and Michael is part of that, is that the spirit of solidarity is there. That's some sort of natural association with the Ukrainian cause is a part of collective spirit that is now dominating in the Czech Republic and stuff with the government and things happening on that front. And you can go down through the activities of major NGOs to normal people who really are willing and able to accept all these refugees, mostly women and children, because their husbands are fighting, and to open up the Czech space for them. Obviously, small nations have sometimes difficulties to be too open, but this is what's happening now. But the question is how long such a spirit can dominate and prevail. What's going to happen when realistic problems, economic situation affected by the Ukrainian crisis, economic downturn, inflation, prices of gas, electricity, food, and so on and so forth. How we can keep this spirit alive and to open again the space for populistic politicians that are very clever how to use it. My second remark, and my third, and then I will shut up. It is concerned, is the Czech Republic part of the struggle? Political realists today would have a tendency to say there's something between Russians and Ukrainians. So please, let's convince them to make a deal between themselves, maybe based on the situation on the ground. If one side controls certain territory, they have to make a deal. But Michael already mentioned our experience, unique in the past, that saving piece of our time might not be very often, or in our experience, the best idea. That if you are dealing with a totalitarian leader, with someone who has no, I would say, limitations in the crudeness and brutality of the behavior, then the only thing that you can do is to challenge this leader and hope that you can win the thing. So Michael, what do you think? First Shakespeare, then realism, Czech style, and then is the Czech Republic part of the struggle?
Yes, thank you, Martin. You know, on Shakespeare, obviously Hamlet is one of the great tragedies of all time, but the fundamental conflict in Hamlet is slightly different from the story of Havel and Zelensky. Hamlet's story is a story of revenge. He's avenging the murder of his dead father, and in the end he brings about a tragic finale in which not just the original perpetrator, but everybody else ends up dead, including Havel himself. The very human motive of revenge was almost completely absent in Václav Havel, which is something that made him very unique and which made him very special, and later also made him being criticized for that in the moment of victory in 1989, when Havel became the most powerful man in the country, he rejected the calls for revolutionary justice on the former rulers, on the communists who were guilty of causing a lot of suffering to many people, of killing some people, of stealing the country blind, etc., etc. And Havel was crucial in one of the central slogans of that revolution, which was, "We are not like them. You know, we will not be trying to do to them what they had been doing to us." And I think in retrospect, although the desire for justice, for seeing the guilty punished, is a completely natural human desire, Havel's choice was the right choice because it prevented the revolution of entering the vicious circle of many revolutions in which the former oppressed become the oppressors and perpetuate the injustices that have been committed. Havel's, and Martin has mentioned it, Havel's motivation, his lifelong drive, was to instead try to improve the world. It's an old concept in Judaism, which is called tikkun olam, making the world better, and it's contained in other religions as well. And it's something that Havel was personified in many, many respects. And when I wrote his biography, I went all the way back to his childhood and to the story of his plan to own and develop a factory which would produce good, not goods, but good. And it's a very naive, of course, idealistic concept, but in many practical ways, he was trying to make it come true in his life. On the second question, yes, it's obviously a problem. How long can we maintain this level of solidarity? How much pain we can take in the next months and perhaps years. It's not just a problem of our country. There are at the moment around 4 million Ukrainian refugees in neighboring countries, in Poland, in Slovakia, in Hungary, and in the Czech Republic. The effects of the economic sanctions that we impose collectively as Europeans and Americans on the Putin regime is very strong, and it's already evident in causing problems for the Russian economy, but it's also causing problems for us because we have to give up many goods that we've been importing from Russia. We already have given up on all the coal that we're importing from Russia, and we will be, I hope, also giving up on oil and gas that we're importing from Russia. And that's a big deal because it's going to cause many, many problems, a lot of pain. the estimates are that the GDP in my country which has been increasing until now, may go down maybe 1 point, maybe 2 points, and it may be a longer period of economic downturn. The inflation is in double digits in the Czech Republic and in other countries of Europe. So there will be all kinds of pain to be shed and endured. And you know, I hope that we can last through it, because, and that brings me to the last question that Martin posed, because we cannot be unaware that we are a part of the struggle. We are not a host country for the refugees. We are involved in the conflict as a party to the conflict, although we are not directly involved militarily. And that's because the Ukrainians are not defending just the borders of their own country and the territory of their country. They are defending a way of life, and it's our way of life. It's the way of life of elected governments, of the rule of law, of popular representation, of liberal democracy, of human rights, of freedom. And it's so important to realize that Putin's attack is not against a country, it's really against this way of life, against liberal democracy. Václav Havel said quite prophetically already more than 20 years ago. He was very critical of Vladimir Putin when he came into power, and when many Western politicians were endlessly impressed by Putin because he spoke passable German and he dressed slightly better than Leonid Brezhnev, which was not a very difficult thing to do. But for Havel, he was a KGB man. He was a secret policeman. He was one of the people that had been after Havel for most of his life. So Havel had no problem realizing what kind of a person, what kind of a mentality this man. But he was also aware of the historical dilemma of Russia and its foreign policy, when he said, you know, the problem with Russia is that it does not exactly know where it begins and where it ends. And many people have read this simply as a statement that Russia is not uncertain of where its borders are. But that's not, in my mind, what Havel had in mind at all. Havel realized that Russia, in practically all its historical incarnations, in the Tsarist regime, in the Bolshevik regime, in the communist regime, and now in the Putin regime, represented an idea of a society and a way of life which was antagonistic and opposed to Western way of life, to our way of life. So it instinctively reacts against and attacks everything that does not conform to the Russian idea of the world. And it's absolutely perfectly illustrated in what has happened in Ukraine over the last 10 or 15 years. As long as Ukraine, after the end of the Cold War, as now an independent country, developed very much along the same lines that Russia developed into a kleptocratic, semi-authoritarian, illiberal regime, it presented no problem for Russia. I mean, there were no conflicts between Russia and the Ukraine about anything. The moment that after the Orange Revolution in 2013, 2014, the Ukrainians decided to follow the Western orientation, become a democracy, become a part of the European Union and come closer to the North Atlantic Security Alliance, it became a deadly danger in the eyes of the Russians, because they read it as this may be coming our way and endangering our idea of the world and our idea of a society. So this is the uncertainty about where Russia begins and where it ends. It begins and it ends where its concept of the world begins and ends. And this is a thing that may change.
Right, so who has the courage to raise a question? One. On, Andres.
Yeah,
Please introduce yourself and speak loud.
hello, thank you for being here and speaking with us. My name is Andres Perez. I'm a senior here at FIU. And my question is, what do you think is the single thing that we can take from the experience of the Czech Republic when dealing with the Soviet Union at the time that could help Ukraine now in dealing with Russia?
Yes. Well, there is a short and a long answer to that question, but I don't think we have the time for the long answer. So I will just refer in shorthand to Havel's most best-known piece of writing, the essay, The Power of the Powerless. And I'm sure that Professor Palouš has referred to that piece of writing in his lectures. And one of the central ideas in The Power of the Powerless is that every dictatorship, every tyranny, every totalitarian system depends not just on its military and its police and the violence and pressure it is able to exert on the society, but it depends in part on the willing or semi-willing cooperation of the society. Yeah, because no dictatorship, no matter how bloody and no matter how how cruel is has enough resources, enough military, enough police to indefinitely suppress the will of the people unless they are willing to go along. And what Havel says in the essay is that once they master the courage to refuse the collaboration with the regime, to refuse refuse it not in any heroic gestures, but in just their ability to withdraw the consent, not to engage in the lip service of praise for the powers that be and what they are required to do, the system will collapse because it will lose one of the main pillars it stands on. And I think this is the lesson that we have learned or witnessed in practice in Czechoslovakia in 1989, and it's the same experience in other countries, and it's not really proven wrong by the fact that in some countries, like in Tiananmen in China in 1989 and the period that followed, the authoritarian regimes are able to suppress the will of the people at a terrible cost and perpetrate the regime for some time. In the end, it's still inevitable that it collapses.
No question from the audience, so I have to step in again. I actually two observations and questions. First is the role of ideology in totalitarian systems. We were convinced that ideology is the centerpiece, that's a creed these people believe in, and that's in the name of ideology they are doing what they are doing, including horrors. But haven't we seen here so easy replacement of progressivist ideology, let's say Lenin's communism, Lenin futures, with some sort of conservative brand revival of some sort of all the traditions in Russia, even something that can be seen as a confusion for conservative people today. I can think about our former president Václav Klaus, who have this, I would say, that life struggle between progressivists and conservativists. And Putin so easily replaced ideology from communism to whatever he has now. The corpse of Lenin are still on the Red Square in the mausoleum, so you can pay respect to them. But I don't think that Putin sees inspiration in Lenin anymore. He has something else in mind. And so this is a puzzling thing that I think Havel's thinking could really absorb, because this was exactly the situation that would be a turning point in Havel's absurd dramas. How easily you can even not taking note of that you are changing your mindset, still having same style of behavior, but different ideas circulating around. That's my first. And the second, Michael was actually playing a very important role during the first visit of Václav Havel to the United States in February of 1990. Václav Havel had an opportunity to address the joint session of US Congress. And actually he started with in his speech, a couple of sentences in English and saying, and now I would like you to have a pleasure to experience the beautiful tongue of my, beautiful sound of my mother tongue. And the rest of the speech was read by Michael, who was standing in front of all these gathered members of the House and the senators, and was the Havel's voice. And in this speech, Havel said, if you want to help to us, help the Soviet Union on his difficult, complicated, but most likely still possible path to its democratic future. So Michael, do you think that, first of all, what do you think about the ideologies? And then do you think that this Havel's suggestion was a realistic one or a possible thing?
Okay, I will start with the second question and then go back to the first, if I can. Yes, it happened as you described in the US Congress, and it made it possible for me to sometimes make fun of Havel when he said, when I gave the address to the joint session of the US Congress, and so I said, no, I gave the speech to the joint session, you gave it to me. And but that was just a banter. But more importantly, this was one of the most memorable lines from the speech about helping us by helping Russia on its difficult road to democracy. And in recent weeks, I've had some people who remember that times say, look, what happened, Havel asked them to do this and they didn't do it, and look what happened. And I think it's wrong. I know it's wrong, actually, because before Havel spoke to the Congress, he spoke to President Bush in the Oval Office, and we were there, his entourage, we were there with him, and he asked President Bush to do for Russia what he asked the Congress to do, and Bush gave him a personal message for Mikhail Gorbachev, because he knew that the next trip Havel was taking was to Moscow in several days. And he told him, please tell Mr. Gorbachev that we stand by him, we will do everything to help him, and we will do everything to help him personally. And in the subsequent months and years, not just the United States, but many other Western countries did their utmost to help build a market economy in Russia, to help demilitarize and denuclearize Russia and some of the countries that became independent after the collapse of the Soviet Union, including Ukraine. Dozens of NGOs who helped build civil society in Russia, media people who helped build the Russian media scene, and many other things. It's just that in the end, Putin has read this as an attempt, not an attempt to help Russia, but as an attempt to destroy Russia by destroying the Russian concept of the world and of history and of the society, and replacing it with the Western democratic concept of a society. And, you know, he was partly right. This is what we were really trying to do in the conviction that that this is what the Russians wanted. And so I don't think that we were guilty of not helping Russia. We were guilty of misreading Putin and his intentions and the underlying stream of Russian history and hatred for the West. Now, Martin, what was your first question?
Is the replacement of ideology from a progressivist one to a very traditional one?
This is something, you know, I have to tell you guys, I just read an op-ed piece today that Martin wrote for a Czech paper on the new Russian incarnation of totalitarianism. And he, in the piece, he refers to his guru, Hannah Arendt, and the three features of a totalitarian regime. And one of the three features is the ideology that, and I've read it, and you know, I am aware of this thinking, but I couldn't help thinking that, you know, in Putin's version of the system, we may be encountering a new type of totalitarianism without ideology. Yeah, because one of the inherent problems with ideologies is that in the end they inevitably turn out to be wrong. You know, you can poison people with the communist ideology for some time, but when the utopia is still not coming true, then people start to suspect this is also much of a BS. And but if you don't have an ideology to begin with, you cannot be proven wrong. You know, you just it's just enough to try to persuade people that all the other ways of life are wrong and corrupt and decadent and fake news, and but you don't have to offer anything yourself. You know, Putin offers no utopia. He just speaks about Russia in general terms and about how great they are and that they're going to win, etc., etc. It doesn't an ideology make.
Okay, La Cubana.
Yeah. Do I come down?
Okay,
Oh,
speak loud.
hi. My name is Elizabeth, and I have a question. As you see, political dynamics like large countries such as like Russia kind of changing the international sphere. I was wondering if you can shed any light or opinions as to the future of Latin America. We see right now that there's still countries that are plagued by communism, but there's you know, political protest and political activism that's working against this. So can you tell me what can you hypothesize what the future for Latin America may hold in this regard?
Martin, I'm terribly sorry, but you will have to translate that question for me because it was garbled and the sound was garbled and I couldn't quite get the meaning.
Again, sorry, because I thought that you were hearing it better than I did. So you will repeat it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Hi, my question is, as we see large political players like international players like Russia kind of changing the political atmosphere right now, I was wondering if you can shed some light or like your opinion as to what this may mean for the international community in Latin America. Right now, we've been seeing a lot of struggles and a lot of political activism in terms of like combating against communism that still plagues certain countries. So I was wondering, in your professional experience, what your opinion is to the future of Latin America may look like.
Thank you.
Okay, it's. I think I got the most of it now, and the long and short of it is that this situation is a game changer. It's an entirely new world we've been living in for the past months or so, because the conflict between liberal democracies on the one hand, supporting Ukraine, and the Russian autocracy or totalitarianism on the other hand, trying to destroy that way of life in Ukraine and beyond is probably irreconcilable. You know, something's got to give. And we hope that, and we are somewhat confident that Putin cannot win, that he will be defeated in that respect. And that will mean that will be bad news for every totalitarian and authoritarian in the world, beginning with Cuba, from Cuba to Venezuela to Syria to other parts of Central Asia and other parts of the world. And it's going to change the landscape, because without a model in Russia, and in some cases supporter in Russia, I don't think they can endure for very long. On the other hand, if Putin wins the conflict, it will spill over into Europe, and it may mean the end of liberal democracy as we know it.
I hope that your Cassandrian alternative is not going to be a realistic one. I don't think that you are subscribing to this hypothesis, but yeah, obviously I am now trying here, communicating with Latinos, with Cubans, Venezuelans, and others, to alert them to action, because obviously what's happening in Europe will have not only spillovers, but a significant effect on them. In our case, small nations have totalitarianism, I think, in two parts. One is Sovietization, which means transformation of their society from within, and then satellization, being a satellite of a bigger country, and then you have some sort of client-patron relationship with them. And it seems to me, and Cuba has a long history of that relationship with the Soviet Union, and has been discussed here in all fronts. So I'm 100% convinced that if Putin fails, and it seems to me that he hardly can win, then it will have an effect on your countries here, and the good luck wishes for those who are prepared, which means who have some program, not just vain talks, but readiness to do something. This is, I think, what Havel was a master of. He was a dissident, he was a playwright, but when the transformation came, he was the head of the revolution, he was a man of action. And this action was effective action. This action was well communicated with partners abroad. So it has both dimensions, not only being able to bring people to the Wenceslas Square and I would say, mobilize the spirit of the nation, but doing right things internationally. Am I right, Michael?
Yes, I think you're right, and that speaks to another very important feature of Havel, and that is the all-pervasive feeling of hope as a driving force for the action. He famously said, and you probably already quoted it to the class, that hope is not a belief that something turns out well, but a conviction that something has a meaning regardless of how it turns out. And this is what we also have as Havel's legacy.
Okay, Michael, we have come to the end of this class. I would love to thank you personally and for these guys here for this communication. I think that he needs a round of applause. There will be more people coming after you. On Thursday, hopefully we'll have a Zoom with Yuri Sergeyevich Lviv, former Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations. And on Tuesday, we still don't know, are supposed to be Vladimir Karamurza, Russian Democrat. But we got a news that he got arrested yesterday or the day before in Moscow. So I'm not sure whether he's going to be able to make it to here. But it is an important conversation. Some of these students might be having an opportunity to travel to the Czech Republic later this year. So I hope that the library will be open space for them and to continue in this discussion. But for this moment, I thank you very much. Good luck, and I'll see you in Prague.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all. Bye.
Okay. And I would like to thank to all the viewers and again to the sponsors of this event. And I hope that we will do another one pretty soon. So thank you and goodbye.